Welcome once again to our virtual Meet the Candidate night for the Weber County Republican Party. Tonight we have our Senate District 19 race. Now, Senate District 19 covers not just Weber County, but Weber, Morgan, parts of Summit County as well. And really, the heart of it is here. It includes an interesting mix of urban and rural areas in the state. And really requires a little bit of a different approach than some of our other races do. We're joined tonight by our candidates for this seat. Again, this is an open seat. We have John Johnson and Johnny Ferry. And we've explained to both, I appreciate the wave there. We have John. No, he isn't actually joining us from the state capitol, although that's sort of awesome that he figured out a way to do that. And it looks like Johnny is joining us from his office. These guys are a little bit on the ball. We've got John's logo and Johnny's logo there in the background. So they listen well when I gave them instructions to consider your background and lighting, and that does bode well, I think, for this conversation tonight. And my name is Ryan Wilcox. I'll be your moderator tonight. We have Jake Sawyer with us, producing and co-hosting in the background. You may or may not hear his voice throughout the event, but he is there holding it all together, and we genuinely appreciate that effort. Tonight, we'll go ahead and start with just an introduction. We'll give each candidate 3 minutes to tell us what they're about, why they're running, what they would like us to know to kick it off, and then we'll move straight into delegate questions. So to start off tonight, we'll turn to Johnny to kick us off.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, delegates who are watching too. For me, it all started 5 generations ago. Many of you know me as Johnny Ferry. I would mention my full name is really John Yeoman Ferry, the 5th. And the first John Yeoman, my great-great-grandfather, was from Chicago. He's a land prospector, and he forever tied the fate of my family to the Golden Spike. As a prospector, he purchased land and right on the Transcontinental Railroad in Corinne, Utah, of all places, and ended up coming out here and farming that land. That's the farm that I grew up on, and that's the background that I know. I come from an agricultural background with farming and hunting. As a young kid, I would play on those same railroad trusses that the Transcontinental came right through. I learned the value of hard work, and I learned how to appreciate the land that we have. As I continued and went on, I served a mission in Toronto, Canada. It was a Chinese-speaking mission, great opportunity there, and then attended BYU. And I feel like as I grew as an individual, really came after that. I took a position and part ownership of a company called Honeyville Grain, and they are based in Honeyville, Utah, and they had a small milling operation. Had a facility down in Southern California, which I took part of and went in and started there. Right on the production line is really where I started. And as I worked and grew with that opportunity, I found that there was a connection with the customers and then in the development of new products. As we grew that business and as we've grown now, that's 20 years ago, I've been with the same company. And as we've developed products and created new things, I've learned a lot in the world of business. I've learned how to meet a budget and how to deal with employees and work with employees. We've got about 500 plus employees now, and we're a multi-state major manufacturer of product. And as I had an opportunity, my wife and I have 4 kids from the ages of 9 to 17. My oldest, my daughter's heading off to Utah State, and as we had an opportunity and work provided a way for me to be able to provide some community service, I saw this as an opportunity, knowing that Alan Christensen was retiring and that he doing a great job there. And I decided this would be an opportunity for me to run. So here I am. This is, I currently serve on the Utah Manufacturers Board, and I find getting involved in the community and with the state has been a great opportunity for me. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm excited that I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you, Johnny. Jonathan, or John, I should say.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate this forum. I appreciate the delegates that are willing to be patient with us in this era of COVID, and you know, it's really a pleasure though to get to know people on the phone and talk to them. You know, I had a good conversation with Johnny, in fact, and I just think it's so nice to be in a race where good people are running. And you know, let me tell you a little bit about me. I come from a pioneer family, and I have lived in North Ogden. I was actually here since the seventh grade. I moved in. I went to Weber High School. I was a Sterling Scholar in mathematics there. You know, my first year, you know, Johnny talks about going out on the farm and stuff. I actually had the honor, I thought, of going to Hawaii and picking pineapples. And you know, after the first day, I thought, this is just not for me. I can't work 10 hours a day out in the fields. And I figured I better go home and start studying. I was a Sterling Scholar in mathematics at Weber High School. I then went on to Weber State College at that time. Now it's university, but I had some really great professors that turned me on to economics. And you know, it's an area that really piqued my interest. Through my professors, I was able to get a fellowship to go to Texas A&M University. I received a PhD in economics at Texas A&M. From there, I was 1 year at the university in Dallas, Southern Methodist University. And then I got the opportunity to go to the University of Mississippi. This was an opportunity for me because I was really involved in artificial intelligence, and I really, you know, wanted to do more with that. And they had a supercomputer center. So I went to the University of Mississippi. I was fortunate to meet three colleagues. We ended up starting a software company. We left the university. We built a system to manage the collateral on mortgage loans. And I've learned a lot in that business experience. I am now a professor at Huntsman School. It's kind of nice to go back in a situation where I really feel like I'm giving back. And you know, I just appreciate, I would really like to get to know the delegates. I would like to reach out. The grassroots is an important thing to me and really motivated me to get involved in politics.
Thank you, John. That was great timing. You took it to exactly 3 minutes. Well done, you two. Our first question is, I think, a pretty basic Republican question. And that is, what is the proper role of government? Now, this came in over and over again as we asked delegates what they'd like to hear from you. So we'll go ahead and start with this one right out of the gate. What is the proper role of government? Johnny.
I would very, very simply say that it's to protect and to protect our life, our liberties, and our properties. So the military through law enforcement and through the judicial oversight, and then to create opportunities through our community development, through our proper water and resource management, and then through education. And simply that's the role of our government. Otherwise, we are participants and we are the ones in control as citizens of that government. We are the ones who give that power.
Thank you, Johnny. John.
Well, you know, it comes back to constitutional rights. I mean, you think about the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those actually aren't granted to us by government, but they're given to us by God. And you know, everything really comes out of those notions. You know, you think about it. If you know, like in taxing policy, let's say, okay, one of the things that you always have to remember is that in order to pay for something, you're going to have to take something from somebody else, something that they worked hard to earn. And you know, I believe the role of government is a limited one. You know, there's certainly things that we can call public goods. Education, you know, is certainly a public good, I would say. You know, our infrastructure, But, one thing I don't think it is I don't think government should be in a position of picking winners and losers in business. I don't think it's right for, government to transfer wealth from one party to the other. One of the biggest problems I think we have in our society is the idea of cronyism and giving money to benefit one company over another. And so I think the role of government is a limited one.
Thank you. The follow-up question to that really relates to the specific role that you're both seeking, which is our state senator here in the 19th district. And that is, what is the role then of a state senator? What is the role that you're seeking to fulfill? We'll start this time with John.
One of the things that really got me interested in this, I was real involved in the Keep My Voice effort. I'm a strong believer of our caucus convention system. I believe in the right of the party to assemble, the right of association that comes out of the First Amendment. Well, that's really important to me. And, a senator can actually look at these policies that are being passed in government and say, is that really in line with the proper role of government? Is that something that the government should be involved in? And the more power we have to the people, the better off we are.
Okay, thank you, Johnny.
I think right off, I would say that the role of the senator is definitely to represent the interests of the constituents that are within the district. When you're considering legislation, you consider the delegates, the constituents that you represent. You're looking to improve the lives of those constituents and to make decisions that would help improve those lives in all balance of life. And I think the proper role of the senator you also have to state that there is complete honesty and transparency that comes along with that role. Second, you got to have a commitment to listen and then to be able to respond to your constituent base. And then finally, support of the party platform, relentless work ethic rooted in things like our community heritage and what it is exactly that our community needs. That's what I believe the role of the state senator is.
Okay, a related question. How does the role of a state senator differ from the role of a member of the House? We'll go ahead and start with you again, Johnny.
Sure. Well, obviously, first, the amount of time between elections is one. The role of a senator is more concentrated. There is more, as there are 29 state senators here in our state and 75, I believe, House members. There's that opportunity to have more of a concentrated effect and to as you are putting together laws and as you're working with your constituents, you have a greater district, a greater amount of concentration in your authority to be able to participate. I also think that you as a senator, you look at it as an opportunity to find ways that you can present ideas and be able to take those ideas and work with a smaller group of fellow senators. And as you do so, you can, I think you can get more things done. I think you can find ways that are effectively participating with that.
Okay, John, contrast the role of a senator. Yeah,
I think certainly the more limited body is going to have more concentration of for one, the people that you represent are a lot broader in scope. I mean, we're representing a much larger district than you would as a House member. There's a lot fewer state senators. I think that being a state senator, I think you have an ability to be a statesman and communicate with the others in the Senate and be a leader for the voices of the people that you represent. I think about the broad nature of the district that we represent, and really, once you're elected to office, you're really representing everybody, and you have to keep that in mind when you do things. And I just think that it would be an honor to serve and to represent the views of those that put me into office.
One of the things, call it a criticism or feedback that legislators often receive is related to how they connect with their constituents. I mean, tonight we're in this virtual meeting place, having this conversation over video chat and over the airwaves, largely because of the situation that we're in. But the reality is it sort of forced us into this 21st century communication. And when it's all said and done, I really think we're going to be better off for having gone through it. With that in mind, how do you envision connecting with your constituents over such a large district, such different demographics? How do you envision connecting with your constituents? John, why don't we start with you on this one?
You know, one of the things I really appreciated about Alan Christensen is he would follow up any legislative session with a long summary of exactly what happened, the positions he had taken. And I think he made a real effort to reach out to people. And I think that's necessary. I kind of like this new technology. You know, it's one thing to send somebody an email. It's another to talk to them face to face. And, we're in a situation like right now, even though we're at a distance, we're still communicating face to face. And there's something about looking someone in the eye and talking to them. The one thing that I'm committed to do, and that is to listen to people. One of the things I say is I will listen and not lecture. And the reason why I say that is that sometimes we get in a situation where we're isolated from those that we represent, that we forget that they have important input into things that we're going to do. And the idea of listening to those voices, that doesn't mean you always agree with somebody, but you always listen to their point of view and you take that into account in making decisions.
Thank you. Johnny.
When I refer to two things in my life that would kind of give perspective on how do you involve voice. I believe that what John is saying about the voice of different individuals and participation. I constantly in my job, I'm the kind of guy where I'll bring people to the table and we all sit around and we counsel and we discuss. And as we sit there and we discuss, I'd love to get voices from all perspectives. So the question that I would have is how do you then do that from a district as large as ours, and how do you get people to be able to be at the table to offer their voice? And then I believe as a group you come up with the best conclusion, and you can then make decisions that will help to represent not only the voice of some at the table, but just in general, just get a good perspective. And so I would suggest that would be one. You got to be involved in the community. You got to be able to be out to events. You got to understand the needs of the community members, and that requires some travel here because of how large our district is. But I'm not afraid of that. I travel now. That's what I do all the time. And I can see myself, I loved being involved with the events and things that go on. We look at our county party as well and the events that they hold. I think having them to the table, having our county leadership and being attentive to those events is important as well. Just get the voices at the table. I think that's what's important.
Hey, thank you both. There's, one of the questions that we've been trying to figure out how to ask you is about more related to your experience. You both talked about a good portion of that in your introductions. So maybe how we'll ask this is we'll just ask you, what do you believe has most prepared you for this particular role? So what in your life and your experience has most prepared you to be our state senator? Johnny, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. It started, I think, for me, coming from my background, and there's nothing like the work ethic you get from working on the farm. From waking up early in the morning to taking care of the water streams to working with the cattle, and then ultimately shoveling manure. Those kind of things have all been really important for me to learn in my life. In addition, so just a base of hard work of learning how to get the water to the end of the row, and application of the law of the harvest. And I also did that around my family, my grandparents, my brothers, my dad, my uncles. All of that was important as we spent time together. That sense of community, of building and holding together as a family, and that has always been something that I fall back on, and I'm extremely proud of and grateful for.
Okay, John.
I think hard work is a really important thing. I think education is an important thing. My educational background has helped me to be successful. I'm actually the only college graduate in my family. In fact, my mother said, "When are you going to stop going to school?" as I was getting my PhD. And then I went to be a professor, and she says, "Oh, I see, you're never going to get out of school." And so I think that helped prepare me. Being an entrepreneur, I think, gives me an understanding of running and building a business. It gives me an understanding of what's going on along the Silicon Slopes and the things that the needs that they have, right? That doesn't mean I believe that government has a role in meeting all those needs, but there's certainly infrastructure and other things. Mostly, I think government has to get out of the way of those things. Being a professor gives me insight into our educational system. I see problems in higher ed. I think we need to get back to educating instead of indoctrinating. Being a parent gives me insight into our primary and secondary education systems. Being the parent of a special needs child helps me to understand the needs that other people have. Being an economist and data scientist, really, that gives me insight into our taxing structure and the effects that we have on the economy. Being a platform Republican, a firm believer of the wisdom.
Looks like we're out of time there, John. Apologies. Okay, that was an amazing answer. I was sorry to cut you off there. The next question relates to, what we have coming up here, what you see coming up here in the next 4 years. It's a 4-year term, as you've mentioned. In that period of time, what would you most like to accomplish? We have the presidential cycle. We always talk about the first 100 days. For some reason, we get obsessed with that as if it means something. But given your first term, what are you going to work on right out of the gate? What would you most like to accomplish? We'll go ahead and start with you, Mr. Johnson.
One of the things is, I mean, there's this notion somehow that the reward for being a state senator or representative is to be able to pass laws. And, I think that's kind of a reward that I'm not that interested in. In my opinion, is how do we get rid of laws? How do we get rid of regulations that are on businesses that keep them from prospering, right? Certainly there are needs to pass laws. I want to be a voice of reason. I want to be an educated voice that protects the rights of the citizens of the state of Utah. And when I talk about that, I talk about really, what is the proper role of government? What is our function? I take tax dollars as being a really important thing, okay? When I'm taking money out of somebody's pocket, I want to make sure that we're spending it on something that actually is a legitimate role for the government to do. And so, I don't, legislation is an important process, but, you look at our last legislative session, we had way too many bills. I mean, do we really need all that many new laws?
Hey, thank you, John. Johnny.
I would, in looking at the first days and trying to get stuff done, I think one of the first things, most important things to start off with is to really start to get in and understand the playing field, understand the rules, understand what it is that, how you can get things done, where you can find help, and ultimately, how do I connect with my constituents and so they can keep feeding in the different needs that they have. I'd also say that once you get past that and you can understand it, then you kick it into gear. And by kicking into gear, I mean, then you look at ideas of how do we control our budgets, and how are we going to manage our budgets. We are going to be, all indications based on how the economy is going to end up here, we are going to have a need to cut we're going to have to make some hard decisions in regards to taxation. These are some of the immediate needs that will come up. How are we going to respond and prepare for the next COVID and for the next natural disaster that may be there? That'll be some of the most important things to take care of in the first 90 days. And I'm excited enough to the challenge for that.
Thank you both. Our next question, you actually provided a pretty good lead in for that. Over the past year, the state legislature has engaged in tax reform exercise that ultimately culminated in the passage of a tax reform proposal in December, and then a referendum process and repeal of that on, I believe, the second day of the session when it started here in January. That didn't necessarily resolve, as you know, the underlying issues that caused the legislature to engage in this process to begin with. So the question really is, what was your position on the initial tax reform proposal? Did you support it? Did you oppose it? Your position on the referendum? You may want to comment on referendums in general, if you'd like. But then really, what we'd really like to hear at this point is, what are your ideas? Like, how do you propose that we move forward from where we are? Is there a structural issue to address? How do we move forward and both, support our economy and provide the necessary services and revenue to do that? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Johnny.
I would, as we take a look at how we look at our budgets, I first suggest that I think we're in a totally different state than we were because of COVID-19. We're in a different world than we were just a month ago. And as we look at our budgets and we look at how the economy is going to affect those budgets, we have to look at it differently than we have. And I kind of sit back when I look at what happened over the past year with tax reform and everything related. As I attended the different, it seems like the tax initiative went through, and we had to get the explanation afterwards. And I feel like that, and with the special session, everything that happened, I feel like that was a way that it really was a botched message. It wasn't properly. Felt like it was pushed, and then there was some explanation that was trying to be made, and the overall effect probably had some positives to it, but the individual communication, particularly the food tax, just didn't go well with the voters. And so, I did sign the tax reformation, and a vocal supporter of that. I feel like that if we look at this again, it is key. What we're telling our constituents is, they're not stupid. They understand what's going on. You can't just push something through, and they're going to respond, and you better listen. We better.
Okay. Looks like we're out of time right there. We'll turn to Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I was involved early on with the tax reform effort. I was probably one of the single largest donors to the process. I was passionate about it, passionate for several reasons. One, taxes on food are very regressive. Thanks to Greg Hughes and John Huntsman, we actually got a lot of those taken off, okay? And that took a very long process to do. And so I'm generally opposed to any tax that's regressive. You think about it, a sales tax is a more stable tax source, but you think about what's going on right now with COVID. The last thing, when people are out of work and they can't, and all they're buying is food, you think about it, you say, well, yeah, but at least we have a stable tax source. Well, they don't have a stable revenue source. And so, those types of taxes just rub me the wrong way. We just had a bill that came before the public, really, and a voter initiative on increasing gas tax, and it was defeated soundly. People do not want more taxes on fuel. The other thing that really bothered me is that we actually effectively had a tax increase. If I look at the taxes, you just a simple graph.
Right. Looks like we're out of time there again, John. Yeah, just to remind both candidates, I know this was one that was hard to fit into 90 seconds. Make sure and watch that chat box on the right, and he'll give you a heads up when that's coming. Um, the next question relates to that issue, and you both touched on it a little bit. The situation that we're in, that the legislature just passed a budget 3-4 weeks ago, the last day of the session, as is tradition, and that budget right now is invalid. Our economy has responded to the current COVID-19 situation. And the reality is the legislature is currently planning a special session soon. I think there probably will be another one, if not two more, in the interim, in order to deal with the budgetary changes that are going to be necessary. This is somewhat reminiscent for me of the first time I ran for office in 2008, when the legislature thought they had a lot more money than they did. And that session had to come back in by September and revise the budget down. And when we were sworn in January, we were told that we had to cut the budget by 18% right off the top before we even saw the final yearly numbers come in. So I think that was a good exercise. It was painful, but it's one of my favorite parts of the state constitution, is it requires us to balance our budget. We live within our means. The question for you is, where do you start? How, as you've reviewed the state budget, you've been watching this pretty closely for a while. Where do you start? Where is the fat that can be trimmed? In your opinion, where do you start that process? Go ahead, Johnny. Oh, hang on.
Sorry.
There we go. You're ready.
All right. All right. So the immediate thing that you have to look at is what are the biggest buckets of the budget? And number one being education, number two being the social services, and then finally the infrastructure projects that are there. Now, you can immediately take a look at those infrastructure projects that are in process, and you can delay. You can push those back. That could be one of the first things that happen. You take a look at social services, and you really start to cut. You start looking at what are the essential services that are required, and then you start to identify those that maybe, wouldn't say that in a robust economy and we're able to support that, then we can have those. But in one that we have to cut, then you have to consider cuts there. And finally, on education, you have to take a hard look at education. That's probably the most sensitive and the hardest one to look at. And when you look at the percentage that you want to pay per pupil, or however you want to measure that, you have to start to make potential cuts for that. As a business owner, you have to go through this. This is exactly what I do on a monthly, weekly, quarterly basis. This is it's really hard to do, and you have to make those kind of decisions. But it mirrors what has to happen with the state level too. Any other types of projects or programs are really less meaningful to the overall budget, but still you look at those and make decisions. But those are your three big buckets you got to look at.
Thank you, Johnny. John.
Well, I agree with that. There are places where we can first look. We have to understand really where most of the money is going. If you look at our state, one of the things that we want to do is really have a look at data. Okay, and Johnny is right. I mean, education. Look at that. You've got the health and environment here. You've got higher ed. Okay, and so we've got all of these areas of the budget that we have to look at. Then we want to use data. We want to look at where things are happening. This is one of the things I wanted to say before. You look at this large increase in income taxes that came between 2016 and 2017. Most of that was due to the Trump tax cuts and the fact that the individual exemptions and deductions were changed. Our state never dealt with that. They just let it go on and let these income taxes continue to grow. We have a structural imbalance probably in motor fuel. We need to answer those questions. But I agree with Johnny that one of the things that we really want to look at, when you think about these things, yeah, it is nice. Let's first look at things that we can delay. Let's look at things that we can put off. But we really have to analyze the data and look at where our spending is. We need to constantly do that.
Hey, thank you both. There are, a number of places where we could find efficiencies. One of the issues that comes up consistently in these questions is the regulatory burden on our businesses, particularly our small businesses in the state. Admittedly, the most egregious examples are federal, across the board. We do have some on the local basis, but we certainly have our own burden of responsibility there at the state. How would you approach, the question is, how would you approach reducing the regulatory burden in order to free up the economy for our small businesses in particular? John, we'll start with you this time.
Well, one of the things that I always look at is, and that's one of the things that bothered me about the whole taxing issue, was that I think we first look, before we decide that we're going to raise taxes, we need to look for inefficiencies. Okay, now the regulatory burden on businesses is a real thing. If we can lower that regulatory burden, then we can attract jobs. To attract jobs to the state is not a matter of just giving people special tax cuts to get here, right? That seems kind of self-defeating in a way. But we can look for areas where burdens are heavy on small businesses and other people. And I think that the first way of doing that, the way I would approach that problem, is say, okay, what are those regulatory burdens? Go visit with small businesses and say, what are the biggest issues that you see in your business, and what's keeping you from being able to expand or do well? And then try to eliminate as many of those as we can.
Thank you. Johnny.
I deal with regulation day in and day out as part of being in the food industry. That's what we regulated by the FDA and the USDA and others, mainly on the federal side. From a state side, what can we do? I think the first thing is there is regulation that comes in that you kind of ask the question, do we really, you kind of put it this, I think you put it this way, do we really need someone to have blank, a 4-year degree, or this particular level of certification in order to blank whatever it is we want to accomplish? I also look at it, and I see this as for us to be able to look at the market and say, as a free market, let's let the economy, let's let the consumer help regulate certain parts of who we are. Obviously, you do have to have safe business. You have to have safe business practices. But ultimately, if your product, or if some of those regulations are inhibiting you from being able to efficiently run your business, and it's hitting the bottom line, and you're raising your prices, and you can't meet that consumer need, you got to let the free market also help have more freedom to be able to regulate if that product should be on the market or not, or that service. And so I think that we can help to stimulate that by allowing it to open up more and have less regulation in that too.
Okay, we're going to move to a little bit of a different conversation here for the next question. Again, I mentioned earlier about the unique characteristics of Senate District 19. It's a mix of rural and urban. And so this question will reflect that a little bit. The federal government owns approximately 2/3 of the land in the state of Utah. Well, essentially, no one in Utah wants to disturb our national parks, our national recreation areas, military installations. Most federal land in Utah doesn't fit into any of those categories. And frankly, keeping all of that land under federal control inflicts great harm on our state's economy, environment, tax base, affordable housing market, and is probably especially our public education system. How much of Utah should the federal government own? And what changes to state and federal law would you support in this area? Johnny, we'll start with you.
I will say the federal government should be out of the state. Now, of course, the federal government won't happen, but I do believe that there are certain parts of the state, there's certain things that we can do. It comes down to local control. It comes down to our ability to understand what we need in our own communities. To have somebody from Washington, D.C., 2,000 miles away dictate what that is, it's not right. They don't know, they can't see that. And so we need to be able to have that control. We need to be able to have the opportunity to deal with our own property, to deal with our own lands, and to know what the needs are of the individual communities that they border or that they're part of. And ultimately, that's, you got to fight for that. You've got to be able to stand up and say that that's not right for the federal government to do what it's doing. And I would support our protecting and preserving those lands as state lands, and for us to manage them as our own communities.
John.
You know, a few of my friends a number of years ago started a think tank at Utah State University called Strata, and Strata really dealt with land issues, but looking at those from market-based principles. How do we manage these things more effectively? How do we get local input into the lands issues? When I was in the state of Texas, I mean, we had the finest universities in the country. They had so much money coming in, and the reason why they did is they controlled their lands, and there was a huge land trust there. Now, you know, one of the problems we have is the federal government controls these lands, and we don't even have the ability to tax those lands. You know, they ought to be paying at least a fair property tax on the lands that they own within the state that were kept from utilizing to their best use. You know, I'm not saying we should tear down national parks. I mean, I think the national parks are a great resource. They attract a lot of visitors into the state of Utah. But, you know, we have federal land right down in the middle of Saratoga Springs. There's a large parcel there. There's no reason for the federal government to own that land, you know, and so we have to get a hold of these. I appreciate the stuff that Ken Ivory did when he was in the legislature, and the things that he's doing now to try to put a.
Hey, thank you both. You know, that naturally leads into a discussion of education funding in the state of Utah. As we mentioned just a minute ago, you know, we do on a third of the state of Utah as far as producing revenue. What our counterparts on the other side of the Mississippi do on 98% plus of their land. It's just not an even playing field right now. So given the current situation that you understand, what with our education system and funding, what would you change about our state's public education system? Would you support a voucher system? Would you support or what support should the state provide to parents who homeschool their children? Or, you know, we're all doing that right now in this COVID-19 scenario. So we're probably getting a good education right now on what that would be like if we all did that. But what would you change right now if you could wave a magic wand and make the change that you'd wanted to see in our state public education system? We'll go ahead and start with you, Dr. Johnson.
You know, one of the things that I really firmly believe, and that is that the closer the decisions are made to the people that are affected by those decisions, the better off we are. I think we need to start treating teachers again like the professionals they are. Okay, I think we need to put education back into the hands of the parents. I believe in vouchers. I think charter schools are a good thing. They're a learning laboratory. Rather than have a mandate like Common Core come down from the federal government, you know, you could think of these charter schools as places where we could experiment along the edges with the education of our children. You know, teachers have an ability to reach children when they're let alone to do it. And you know, parents can make good decisions. Our education shouldn't be dictated by someone in Washington any more than it's dictated by someone in Salt Lake City. The closer those decisions are to the parents, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you, Johnny.
On that ability to have local decisions made. I'm in a unique situation where my wife is a public school teacher. She teaches here locally, second grade at Majestic Elementary, and I've got 4 kids all in the public school system as well. And as my wife and I sit and we discuss the different needs, and she comes home and I get a front row seat to hear the challenges that she's up against, and as a teacher, she puts her heart and soul into each one of those kids and seeks to help them. And I think what we need to do is we've got to be able to, as John said, look at the local needs that are there. As we look at education overall, you have to, I do believe in a support in the idea that you have choice, that you do have choice with both with private school, homeschool, charter schools, as well as in our public school. And as those options are presented, it's the parents who have to make those decisions and ultimately work with their children, work with the teachers and the administration in order to provide the student with the best possible education. And I do have that unique perspective with my wife being a teacher.
Hey, thank you both. A lot to think about there. There's a question that I'm going to ask next that after I ask you the question, I'm going to tell you who sent it in. I'm not going to do that with any of the other questions. Most of them are a number of people anyway. But this one might be fun after you give your answers. So with that preamble, should any person in Utah be denied equal protection under the law based solely on whether the person in question has been born? Dr. Johnson, we'll start with you.
I'm a firm believer in the right to life. It's interesting that this has been sold as a matter of choice. There's many choices that take place before a child is conceived. Okay, and I would support a heartbeat bill. I think that the left has gone too far. And I think they've awoken a sleeping giant in some respects, right? Because you think about it. I mean, we have a bill that came across in Virginia where the choice of the mother extended past the birth of the child. So if they just if the mother decided after the child was born that they didn't want the child, it could sit on the table and die. I mean, that's going to the point of ridiculous, okay? And I'm a firm believer that, you think about the right to life. I mean, that's a fundamental God-given right. And I think it's something that we have to be pretty serious about, okay? That doesn't mean that, you say, well, are there exceptions to that? Well, you could think about rape. You could think about incest. But I think those exceptions are actually rare. This is not a form of birth control. And I think life is precious.
Thank you. Mr. Ferry.
I agree and 100% would go with that. I would say, when I look at it and I consider the spirit of that individual child and the time of heartbeat and the time that we have to consider what we have in our hands to make a choice of what potential that spirit has going forward, we have to consider that what we're taking away is that life, is the right to that life. And so I'm 100% supportive of that as well. I find that when I consider and I look at my own kids and their lives and what they've accomplished and what potential that they have, we have to give that same. It is, regardless of the choices that were made prior to the birth of that child, it is the right of that child to be able to have life and to live their life. And I'm a firm believer in that for sure.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move again to another topic here. This one is probably going to be pretty easy for you two, knowing you both a little bit. But we want to hear your position on the Second Amendment in general, and then specifically your position on constitutional carry. Would you support legislation to allow constitutional carry to become the law in the state of Utah? Go ahead and start with Mr. Johnson again.
That's an interesting question. And if you read the Second Amendment, it's very simple. It says the right of a citizen to bear arms should not be infringed by the government. Okay, that's pretty clear to me. Okay, And I would support constitutional carry. I would oppose red flag laws. I think that the fundamental right to bear arms is an important one. You know, ultimately, it gives us, you think about it, it gives us the right as citizens to rise up against a despotic government, and that's an important thing. That keeps us in a position where the government looks out for the rights of the citizens. Despotic rule could really ruin our country, and I believe firmly in the Second Amendment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ferry.
I also believe firmly in that Second Amendment. As a young kid, I've always been around guns. I've been around firearms, and I respect them. And my family runs a couple duck clubs as part of our farming and ranching operation. We look at it as recreation, but also then the right to bear arms presents an opportunity for us as citizens to exercise our rights. I would also support constitutional side of things to be able to go across state borders and be able to take and bear have my arms and not have to know and be regulated just because I crossed the state border. As this is a constitutional issue, this is something that was given by the rights of the Constitution that therefore should be protected across state borders. I would support any legislation that would be presented or brought forward and give us the opportunity to maintain those rights.
Okay, this next one should be a really easy answer. Do you support President Trump's reelection? Johnny.
Yep, go with President Trump. Let's get him back in. I am 100% supporter of President Trump, and I'm excited for him. I love the energy that he brings, and I do think he has tremendous leadership capability, and he's done so much for us as a country. Get him back in, and then let's continue to support him. I think the next 4 years of him being in office will give and prove even more so that he was the right president for this time and for the next 4 years, and he will continue to leave that legacy.
Hey, Mr. Johnson.
I'm a firm opponent, a firm believer in President Trump. Okay, you think about President Trump. He's more pro-life than any president in recent history. He's appointed over 200 federal judges and 2 Supreme Court justices that are strong defenders of the Constitution and don't believe really in judicial activism. You think about that change. He allowed people at Cato and Federalists to vet those judges, okay? And these people are picked because they don't believe that legislation should happen from the bench. He's this strong defender of our national sovereignty. He's pushed back against globalization and the New World Order. He's defended our borders, believes in merit-based immigration. He believes in American exceptionalism. You think about the vision of our founding fathers and Reagan's notion of the shining city on a hill. I mean, Trump has really come forward on those issues, and I appreciate the things he's done. People can criticize him and say, well, I just wished he'd stay away from Twitter. Well, you know what? Someone in his position has to push back, because there are powers in our government that really need to be pushed back against. I look at what's going on right now with COVID, and everybody takes it as a gotcha moment with the president rather than uniting and trying to solve this.
Thank you. It's always better to have candidates who have more to say. So I appreciate that. This next question is a pretty important one. We're meeting tonight, having this discussion in large part because of our caucus convention system, right? We're preparing for, in this case, our state convention, which is coming up in just a few weeks. Our county convention is just a week and a half away. Regardless of the situation we're in right now, dealing with this COVID-19 outbreak, this is an important part of the vetting process. The question is, would you support legislation or commit to supporting legislation now, repealing 2014's SB 54, recognizing the right of political parties to determine the means by which they select and nominate their candidates. Mr. Johnson.
Absolutely. That's probably one issue that drives me more than anything, and that's an issue that actually convinced me to run for this seat. Look at last session, we had the votes in the Senate, and then to modify, at least modify SB 54 to allow political parties to have another option, so that they could have a caucus only candidate. Okay, we had enough votes to pass that, and Governor Herbert came out and said, "Oh, well, I'm going to veto that." And so, what happened then? The Senate ran for cover. You bet I would support that. I think that's the worst law that's ever been put on the books. It was a Incumbent Protection Act. It was an act to allow people with money to get on the ballot. I'm so opposed to SB 54. That's actually one of my pet peeves.
Okay, Mr. Ferry.
My personal experience in this one has been that so if you take give us something different than what we have. It is I've gone both routes, and I find that after going through this, it's something that's tearing our party apart. We will continue to have this argument that will blind us to good candidates and good opportunities and people who would normally have the opportunity to present themselves. And I look at this as a way it just pulls the party apart. Give me legislation, I'll sign on the bottom line that will change that. I would be happy to support a change to SB 54.
Okay, thank you both. As you're well aware, we've been through the legislative cycles since then. It's been 6 years. We've actually had out of our area of Weber County, we've had legislation sponsored and passed through the House. This year we had the votes in the Senate to address it, and that where those lawsuits have failed, it will be left to the legislature to act. And I hope that we can finally settle that and again bring some sanity to this process. We're looking for a few more questions here as I scan through the ones that have been submitted. We've alluded to the ways that government picks winners and losers in the economy a number of times. What we'd like to hear from you is how you perceive that the government does that, the state government, and what you would do to address it. How do we even the playing field for our small businesses? To me, this is a very similar question to the tax or the regulation portion, where we even the playing field for our small businesses and allow them to succeed. We'll start with you this time, Johnny.
For us is coming from a small business and knowing what it's like to start that business and work from the ground up. What was it why did I succeed, and why did the team that I worked with succeed, and ultimately the employees that I worked with? Why did we succeed? The one, you have to have good leadership. You have to be able to have a good employee base to pull from. When Honeyville had a choice to make of where we were going to put our headquarters, and this is 3 years ago, we were going to move our headquarters. We had outgrown where we were. And at the time, we were not in the county. We were in Box Elder County. And we also had facilities outside of the state that we considered to moving our headquarters to. What we ended up looking at in order for us to be competitive in this area was the workforce. We had to have an educated workforce that had the skill set and that had the capability and capacity to support our business. And as we looked and we found the location where we're at now, which is right here in the Ogden BDO, our decision was based on just looking at how supportive the Weber County Chamber of Commerce was, how supportive the environment was to our business, and the regulations and the different things that they helped us get through to get our place started and get our facility built. And today we have 350 employees right here that we brought in. I personally experienced that myself.
Okay, Dr. Johnson.
Well, this is an interesting question because for instance, we just gave Amazon, a kickback on sales taxes for collecting sales taxes in the state. Well, Amazon was going to have a nexus in the state. We see their trucks driving around all the time. But so what do? We rush to give them a kickback on the taxes that they collect. Well, why didn't that same thing apply to Overstock.com? Why doesn't it apply to other businesses? If an incentive like that from government is good enough to attract jobs, isn't it good enough to keep jobs? Okay, and then we have to address, is the cost, outweigh, does the benefit outweigh the cost of doing that? That's the way that government sometimes picks winners and losers. It surprises me of the amount of cronyism within the state of Utah. We don't need to lobby government for special favors in business. I think in a large part, we need to get government out of the way. Okay, that doesn't mean we don't have a local chamber of commerce that helps a small business get past the regulatory hurdles to get in. But government really shouldn't be picking winners and losers.
Thank you. The next question, and we'll just wrap up with a couple more, relates to, why you're a Republican to begin with. What does it mean to be a Republican to you? What does it mean to be a conservative? And whether or not, what is your understanding of what that word means? How does that describe your approach to public policy? In the decisions that you'll make. So really, I guess the summary is the first question: why are you a Republican? We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Ferry again.
I'm a Republican because I believe in the principles of the party platform. As you read through those principles and you study and understand, I kind of go back to an experience that I had as a kid in high school. Rob Bishop Congressman Bishop happened to be a teacher of mine. And one of the events that we had is he had all of us line up, and then he asked a series of questions that would pinpoint how conservative we were, how liberal we were in our thinking. And I found myself at the far end on the conservative side, and that was just at a high school age. That was the first time I really recognized what some of those principles meant, and what my parents and what my grandparents were trying to teach me all those years. And as I've taken that now, applied it to my own kids, and I've seen the type of values that come more than anything, the beliefs and value structure that comes from being a conservative, and then tying that to a Republican Party that you can be part of, that you can be a group and be participating in on a regular basis. That's what the bigger picture of being a Republican is for me, is the opportunity, the freedoms to protect our freedoms, and those conservative values that we look at every single day and try and instill in our children. I'm proud to be a Republican, and look forward to continue that heritage.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
I had the privilege, and I call it a privilege, of growing up during the Reagan Revolution. When I was at Weber State, I was chair of the College Republicans, and Reagan actually visited Utah that year, and I got to serve on the White House advance team. And I just am just inspired by his talks about the shining city on a hill, his talks about American exceptionalism, his talks about the fact that our founders were inspired to come up with the government that we have. And I want to protect that. I want to protect those rights. I just think that our party platform, you think about it, if you read through the Utah GOP Republican Party platform, it really lays out what it means to be a Republican. And I would encourage everybody to go read it. Okay. And I am a strong platform Republican. I believe in all of the principles in the party platform. I believe in the shining city on a hill. I believe in the freedom that we have through our constitutional republic. I just think that our kids.
Hey, we're out of time once again. For our last question, we will turn to your wrap up. It's not really a question, I suppose, but whatever you'd like us to leave our delegates with as you consider their conversation tonight. It could be, maybe it's a question that you've heard a lot that I haven't asked you, or something that you just would like to make sure that our delegates know about you, or leave us with. We'll give you each 3 minutes for this part of the discussion, and we'll start again with Mr. Ferry.
And closing up, Ryan, thanks for putting this together, and as well for our Weber County Republican leadership of providing this opportunity. When I think about the most important thing to me in running for this office, it really was to be involved in the community and to hear and to be a voice at the table. I think about the opportunities that we have going forward. Immediately, we're going to have to prepare and respond to the COVID-19. We're going to have be prepared in our economies, as well as taking a look at what we can do for when the next event hits. I also look forward to taking ideas as I sit and when I look at ideas, I look at the opportunity to share ideas. I'm a very bring everybody to the table. Let's talk it through and let's figure out what we can do to get this done. I always refer back to just some simple things that I had done as an individual, which would be believing that people have the capability to contribute, and pulling and getting feedback from, and what can you find that they can contribute. I look at, I'm going to step aside. This is something that, so when we were, I have it sitting over here. When we were, an idea that came up on something like this is a Utah-based company. Some of you know them. This is something that we manufacture here. This is an idea that just, I think we can find ways and ideas that we can start small, grow it big, and try and make a difference in our communities. I see our government as a way for us to encourage entrepreneurialism, encourage control of encourage our control of the people around that would seek to take away our rights. I look forward to serving and having my family support and everything else that comes along with serving in this capacity. And I'm grateful to be a Republican and part of this party. We've got to consider our youth, and how are we going to take and encourage our youth and get them excited. You can't have somebody with a socialist background come in and messaging and come into our state and have the youth excited. We've got to get our youth excited again. We got to get them out and have a cause in Republicanism. I'm excited for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Dr. Johnson.
You know, people ask me why I'm running, and you know, at first, I was involved in protecting the freedom of association movement with respect to our caucus convention system. I was also on the front lines of the tax referendum, which I see as the greatest grassroots effort that's happened in the state for many years. Okay, and I was a participant. I was a donor. I was pushing this. Through this process, I became concerned with the state of our legislature. I believe we need to go back to our conservative roots and principles outlined in our party platform. And places we've swayed, the First Amendment right of freedom of association, freedom of speech. You think about that. Kim Coleman's been trying to pass a free speech bill on college campuses for quite some time. Why is that such an issue? Why would our universities be opposed to having free speech? What about the Second Amendment right to bear arms? I'm pro-life. I believe in the party platform on immigration. I believe in a fair and equitable tax policy. But we should always consider spending first. I believe firmly in the proper role of government. I think it's time for us to push back against the liberal education that's, I say we should educate and not indoctrinate. I don't mind if somebody teaches about Karl Marx on a college campus, but I think they have to be honest about what they're teaching. The #1 textbook today in our high schools is called A People's History of the United States, written by Howard Zinn, who was actually a radical communist. in the 60s. What in the world are we doing to the education of our children? I don't mind if they learn some about that, okay? But I think we need to be honest. Our students need to understand what Adam Smith wrote about in The Wealth of Nations. They need to understand, not only the wealth of nations, but the theory of moral sentiment. How a capitalist system is actually the most moral system that we have, okay? Someone needs to push back at some point and say, wait a minute, this has gone too far, okay? We need to return to the principles outlined in our Constitution, okay? We need to promote capitalism. And I just believe firmly that we can do that. And I believe firmly in the principles that our founders laid out for us. And I would really like to see our students understand those principles a little bit better than they do today. I would really appreciate your consideration. I would appreciate your vote. I'm a caucus-only candidate. I really appreciate.
All right, looks like we're done there. Thank you both. It is a difficult thing to run for office. It just is, and it takes an enormous amount of time and commitment and effort. And we really do appreciate having good candidates that have filed and are willing to run, and especially to engage with our delegates in this format. Now, we do have one thing we haven't told you about. That isn't really, well, it's not an official question, but we're going to ask it anyway. And that is, we want to know what your favorite restaurant is in Weber County. Since this is the Weber County GOP, apologies to Summit and Morgan, but what's your favorite restaurant in Weber County? What's your favorite dish at that restaurant, and why? All right, we'll go start with Mr. Johnson.
I actually have to I have to stick to my roots, even though it's in Pleasant View and not North Ogden. But I tell you, those guys at the Lost Texan, that guy is a patriot. That guy is a conservative. He makes the best barbecue. I mean, having spent time in Texas, I really appreciate the things that he's done in our community. I appreciate his outreach to veterans. And man, if you want to eat something that's good, go get the smoked meatball.
Hey, that's a great one. I appreciate that one being brought up there. It's one of my favorites. Johnny, what you got?
Well, I'm kind of in a sticky position here because my brother-in-law happens to own Kurt's right there on Washington. And if I don't say that, he might be pretty upset. But I also enjoy a good dish at Arroyo D, right off of 12th Street. That's the Thai food place. Their basil chicken is amazing if you get a chance to try it.
Well, wait. We don't get to pick two. We don't get to pick two. What's your favorite, Johnny?
I better say Kurt's.
No. But see, this is a very political answer, and I don't know that that's what we want to hear right now.
I'll go to both of them. They're both good.
Okay. You do have to pick, and I'm going to explain why right now. Because the first state delegate from Senate District 19 that sends an email to Weber County GOP at gmail.com with the correct answers as to which restaurants you picked is going to get a $20 gift certificate to one of those restaurants. So I can't have you pick both, Johnny.
All right, let's go with Kurt's.
Okay. All right. So you're going to have a choice. Those of you who stuck around this long to listen to this conversation, we really do appreciate it. You're going to have a choice between Kurt's Drive-In and Lost Texan Barbecue. And frankly, both are awesome. So I'm glad that those are the two that you picked. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for spending the time to understand the issues, to really vet our candidates, regardless of the situation that we're in. It really does matter. And we appreciate, of course, Mr. Ferry, Dr. Johnson for jumping on, spending the time and really the effort to reach out and do our part to to talk to our delegates and give them the information that they need to make this decision. Again, that state convention is April 25th. We have a number of communications coming out over the next few weeks about how that's going to take place. Make sure you watch your email, the state party website. The state party will be handling this one so that you're prepared and you know how to vote we're using the Votes app, both at the county party and the state party, to take care of this election. It really is pretty cool. I've run through some of the demos with that over this last weekend, and it was a lot of fun to be able to do that. Again, I think there's going to be a lot of consequences to this experience that we're having, and a lot of them are really going to be improving the way we operate in the long term. So again, thank you. We wish the best of health and luck to all of you listening, of course, and to our candidates. Thanks once again for joining us, and best of luck to you both.
Thank you.